They say that hindsight is always 20/20, and that nobody really knows how good they had it until they look backwards. Nowhere has this concept been more readily apparent than with the Star Wars IP. With a string of failed projects, a fan base that's never been more divided, and no real end in sight to the issues that plague the franchise, I thought it'd be interesting to slap on a pair of rose-colored glasses and take a little stroll down memory lane. So settle in, and let's take a look at the first movie in the Star Wars prequel trilogy, Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Now, I'm not saying that Episode 1 is some misunderstood masterpiece that was ahead of its time. Far from it, as a matter of fact. But what I am saying is that in the 20 odd years since its release, I've finally begun to understand just what George Lucas was trying to accomplish with this movie. Right from the opening crawl, we're treated to a story that is heavily couched in the politics and economics of the Star Wars galaxy. We're given the belligerence of a trade conflict that has the potential to ignite a civil war, and we're introduced to the Jedi that have been dispatched to settle the dispute. So far, so good. This setup is perfectly in line with the kinds of stories and plot threads that the wider Star Wars universe had been following until that point. And while I may be totally on board with it, it also brings me to my first sticking point. Star Wars as an IP had never been specifically for children. Yes, there were cute animals, brightly colored lightsabers, and the blasters made cool sound effects, but the storylines themselves revolved around planetary destruction and genocide, pogroms against religious orders, and galactic totalitarianism. These are not themes for the faint of heart. And while Star Wars may have appealed to the younglings, it was by no means targeting them. Episode 1 was the start of the IP for getting its roots. But more on that in a moment. After the crawl, we're given a briskly paced sequence where we're introduced to our primary protagonists, Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Hello there.
We're also given our first look at the main villain of the next three movies, Darth Sidious, who, given our foreknowledge, we know is playing both sides of this conflict. It's a strong start to the film. The stage is set, the conflict is established, and the pieces have begun to move. Then it all comes to a screeching halt with the cancer that would see the entire franchise infected. Jar Jar fucking Binks. Now, as much as I hate the character and frankly the whole Gungan subplot, I'm not saying that they were in some way narratively responsible. I'm saying that the Gungans represented the boardroom kidification of Star Wars in an effort to sell toys. Rather than create cool merchandise based off the movie, they worked backwards, starting with toy ideas and working them into the script. I submit that if the Gungan race was entirely excised from this movie and the Nabooians were allowed to stand on their own 2 feet, it would have been a much more impactful event for the audience. You can rewrite the final battle, which was ridiculous anyway since the Gungans were using medieval technology against the Trade Federation, and you don't have to listen to Jar Jar sounding like an utter moron for the majority of the film. Yes, you're falling back on the plucky resistance trope, but it works for a reason. Thankfully, we, along with our protagonists, surface from the depths and are right back into the space opera. One desperate escape and a thrilling space battle later, and we come to Tatooine to meet the boy who would be Vader. Now, I'll freely admit that as a kid, I was not a fan of Jake Lloyd's performance. Part of that was probably jealousy that he got to play such a pivotal role in my then-favorite franchise on Earth, but whatever the reason, I wasn't happy. Watching him now, I realized that the kid wasn't that bad. Sure, there were some awkward line reads, but 1, he was a kid, and 2, if he'd been given some better direction and maybe a couple more takes, I'm positive he would have been just fine. Besides, he looked and acted like he wanted to be there more than Natalie Portman ever did, so I'm inclined to cut him some slack. Not that it matters at this point, of course. Next, let's talk about the pod race. As a kid, I loved it. The bright colors, the sensation of speed, the weird aliens all coalesced into a thrilling scene that stuck with me for years. As a teenager, I grew to hate it, but hating things is kind of in the teenager job description. I felt like it slammed the movie to a halt. It was a useless tech demo, and it was just a way to pad the runtime. As an adult, I realized that both viewpoints were right.
From a certain point of view.
Does it completely stop story progression? Sure. Is it still a fun sequence? Absolutely. Besides, it gave us what is arguably the best Nintendo 64 game of all time. Get at me. The pod racing scene is, to my mind, George Lucas splitting the difference between kid-friendly and adult-friendly, without skewing too far in one direction or the other. To use another movie's metaphor,
Bran with a donut. A Bran donut.
it's both substance and entertainment. Besides, it's no more ridiculous than whatever the hell the Fast and the Furious franchise has been doing, and at least this is science fiction. The last moment on Tatooine I want to talk about occurs when Anakin is leaving with Qui-Gon. We see him trudging off at the Jedi's heel while his mother, Shmi, watches, both sad that he's leaving and grateful that he has the opportunity for a better life. This scene is peak drama. The conflict inside Anakin, that will always be inside Anakin, is revealed in full as he is pulled in two directions at once. When you take into consideration the full breadth of his story, i.e. his fall to the dark side, it becomes even more tragic. You're forced to ponder the what-ifs of it all. What if Anakin had stayed on Tatooine? What would his life have been like? What if he'd rejected the prophecy? Would he have been happier in the end? This, in my opinion, is one of the greatest moments in the history of Star Wars cinema, and it's one that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. A quick scuffle with Darth Maul, and suddenly we're back to galactic politics and the machinations therein. This movie, arguably this trilogy, needed to pick a lane. I'm not saying you can only carry one plot thread at a time, but when you're forced to balance three of them, all of which are central to the story you're trying to tell, and give each of them the same importance in the narrative, it leaves all three feeling very anemic. There needs to be some focus, something that the audience can be brought back to, a story they can be grounded in. Focusing on Naboo and the Trade Federation's invasion would have helped the audience sympathize with them, given them something to root for. Focusing on Anakin would have helped the audience connect with the character, allowing them to empathize with the little guy and make his fall all the more tragic. Hell, even if the focus had been on Palpatine's grab for political power in the Senate, it would have grounded the audience in the world and helped them care even more when the Clone Wars kick off in the next movie. But as it stands, we're jumping back and forth between all three plot points, none of which seem to be the main one that we're supposed to care about. As an aside, I'd like to quickly talk about the series that could have been. I had this thought as I watched the scene where Anakin, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan are standing before the Jedi Council, and Qui-Gon just kind of kicks Obi-Wan out the door in favor of Anakin. Obi-Wan is clearly shocked by this, and I couldn't help but imagine that somewhere out there in the multiverse is a movie that explores Obi-Wan's resentment of Anakin. A movie that sees him hurt that the master he looked up to and trained with for decades casually tossed him aside for the shinier toy. Everything else proceeds as normal, but that festering bitterness causes him to neglect Anakin, to not focus on him, and thus not notice when the boy begins to fall to the dark side. I don't know. It could have been interesting. We come back to Naboo, which we haven't seen for a third of the movie at this point, and are expected to care when Padme rallies the Gungan race to fight for her. I'm just gonna say it again. Cut the Gungans out like the tumor they are, and you have the Nabooians stand on their own 2 feet. Show me house-to-house fighting, guerrilla assaults that turn quickly under the crushing weight of the droids' numbers. Show me a resistance movement that Padme can link up with to fight back against the Trade Federation. Show me a population that cares about its freedom, and I'll show you a better movie. As it stands, we've got about 15 minutes of a battle without a single human actor appearing on screen. A battle that sees a regimented and organized droid force demolish a supposedly advanced society that uses war animals, catapults, and slings. Are you fucking serious? No, really, are you fucking serious? I have no evidence to back this up, but watching this ridiculousness, I couldn't help but feel like George Lucas was in no small part responsible for the CGI snooze fests that Hollywood turns out today. Finally, we come to a piece of cinematic history. This is perfection. Even now, 20-something years later, it still holds up as the pinnacle of lightsaber duels. Don't get me wrong, the Episode 3 duel between Anakin and Obi-Wan is still good, but it's not this. In the end, the good guys win, the day is saved, and the bad guy loses. Or does he? Star Wars Episode 1 was always going to be a smash hit. It was the first movie in the franchise in 16 years, and to be frank, George Lucas could have made the whole damn thing about the Gungans, and it still would have made $1 billion. Now, it might have seemed like I was shitting on this movie for the whole video, but I firmly believe that the narratives and themes he wrote about have stood the test of time. The story of Anakin, the downfall of the Republic, and the invasion of Naboo are all powerful topics, any one of which could have filled out their own movie. It's when you try to spin them all together that it starts to fall apart. These are big stories, and each one of them needed more time to resonate with the audience. At the very least, two of them needed to take a back seat in favor of the third. Anyway, that's all I've got for you this time, so if you could do me a favor and hit the like and subscribe buttons, I'd really appreciate it. Every little bit really helps me out. Also, go ahead and check out the other videos on my channel, or hit up my website and see my blog and maybe buy one of my books on Amazon. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.